Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're tackling a concept that totally shatters a huge modern myth. If I were to ask you right now how to store food for months or, even years, you'd probably jump straight to freezers, walk-in pantries, vacuum sealers, or maybe those massive humming generators, right? But what if I told you that true long-term food storage doesn't actually require a single watt of electricity? No constructed root cellar, not even a pantry. Literally, all you need is the dirt beneath your feet. We're going to explore 17 incredible plants that quietly store food for you. Actually, scratch that. They don't just store food, they literally store themselves. Okay, let's dive right into this. No freezer, no pantry, no electricity, just the soil. That idea right there, it fundamentally redefines how we should think about food security. We're so incredibly used to the hustle of harvesting crops, pulling them out of the dirt, and then immediately going into full panic mode to preserve them before they spoil. But nature has already figured this out. It's engineered a brilliant workaround. The ground itself is the ultimate zero-energy refrigerator. And these 17 specific tubers, they're perfectly designed to just sit there in the earth until the exact moment you actually need them. Now, don't worry, we're not just going to read off a tedious list of 17 plants. Instead, we're grouping them by their literal biological superpowers to really understand how nature stores food. We'll look at the earth as your pantry, chemical defenders, the cold sweeteners, foraging woodlands, and wrap up with historical lifesavers. So, starting off with Section 1, the earth is your pantry, where we'll be shattering those modern food storage myths. Normally, modern harvests are just a frantic race against the clock. If you miss your narrow little window of opportunity, boom, your entire crop rots in the field. But our first plant, cassava, flips that rule completely upside down. 3. That is the astonishing number of years that cassava can sit, fully mature, underground without going bad. Seriously, think about that for a second. You plant it, and in about 6 months, it's technically ready to eat. But you don't actually have to harvest it. You can just leave it. Come back in 1 year, 2 years, or 3 whole years later, and it'll just be sitting there, continuing to grow and quietly stockpiling starch. It's like having a savings account you can just leave alone until you're hungry. It pulls this off because it's loaded with natural chemical compounds called cyanogenic glycosides. That's basically a built-in pesticide that tells insects, hey, back off my stored energy. But wow, here is the wild contrast. The very second you pull that cassava out of the ground, the clock starts ticking fast. Within 24 to 72 hours, it hits post-harvest physiological deterioration. It discolors, turns super bitter, and rots. The takeaway? Cassava is absolutely not a stored-in-a-bag kind of crop. The ground is its only pantry. Now let's look at another plant that uses this underground storage trick, yacon. People call it the Peruvian ground apple. It's this crisp, refreshing root that grows these massive storage tubers. But unlike your typical starchy potato, its calories come from fructosaccharides. Those are sugars that the human body doesn't even fully digest. So it gives you this incredible, refreshing, sweet energy straight from the earth while barely even bumping your blood sugar. When you're stuck surviving on bland, repetitive emergency rations, having a source of healthy, crisp sweetness just waiting in the dirt is, well, it's an absolute game changer. Moving right along to Section 2, chemical defenders against disease. This is all about built-in botanical armor. Now, what's really interesting about this next group is how they survive high up in the Andes Mountains. These resilient little tubers act as their own exterminators. They don't just sit there passively waiting to be eaten, they actively fight back. First up is oca. It's gorgeous, super vibrant, but its real secret weapon is oxalic acid. It gives it this lemony tang that pests absolutely hate. But if you just leave it out in the sun after you harvest it, it cures into this wonderfully sweet, delicious treat. Next, we have mashua, the aggressive defender. This one is completely packed with isothiocyanates. That's the exact same chemical that gives horseradish its fiery kick. It acts as a heavy-duty natural antibiotic and fungicide, killing off spores and chasing away burrowing voles. It's so effective that traditional farmers actually plant it next to their other crops just to act as a bodyguard. And finally, check out uluco. Because its biology is totally different from the potato family, it is 100% immune to late blight. Yes, that is the exact same devastating fungal pathogen that caused the Irish potato famine. So uluco isn't just food, it is literal living disaster insurance. All right, on to Section 3, the cold sweeteners. We're looking at using winter as a flavor enhancer. So leaving the mild mountains, what happens in regions where the ground freezes completely solid? Well, these next plants use a brilliant step-by-step biological trick. They don't just survive the freezing cold, they actually need it to taste good. Here's how it works. When the soil temperatures plummet, they don't die off. Instead, the plant hits a survival switch and actively starts converting its stored starches into simple sugars. By jacking up the sugar concentration inside its cells, it actually lowers the physical temperature at which those cells would freeze. It is literally manufacturing botanical antifreeze to survive the winter. And the best part? The wonderful side effect for us is that it makes the food incredibly sweet. Let's see how 3 amazing plants use this exact step-by-step anti-freeze process. First, the Jerusalem artichoke or sunchoke. It converts its main carbohydrate, inulin, straight into sweet fructose the second deep winter sets in. Then you've got salsify, also known as the oyster plant. It just sits there, perfectly happy under the snow, bridging that terrifying 5 to 6 month gap between the autumn harvest and the arrival of spring greens. I mean, think about how desperate that gap used to be for our ancestors before they had grocery stores. With salsify, you could literally just brush aside the January snow and dig up fresh food. And parsnips, most people actually harvest them way too early. If you just wait until after a hard ground freezing frost, this whole freezing point depression strategy kicks in. It gives the parsnip this deep, almost caramel-like sweetness that is a massive reward for the patient forager. Let's shift gears to Section 4, Foraging Wetlands and Woodlands. This is food hiding right in plain sight. If we step away from the traditional garden entirely, the wild ecosystem itself acts as this massive, insulated, zero-maintenance storage unit. Take arrowhead or wapato. It doesn't even grow in soil. It thrives in shallow ponds. The cold, oxygen-poor mud perfectly shields its starchy tubers year-round from insects and crazy temperature swings. Then you have woodland perennials like Solomon seal and the Indian cucumber root. These guys use the deep shade and slow, stable temperatures of the forest floor to protect their energy from any surface crop failures. And the Indian cucumber root is just remarkable. It provides this vital sensory variety because it tastes exactly like a crisp, fresh cucumber right in the dead of winter. This is so incredibly important because it fights off dangerous appetite fatigue. That psychological wall you hit when you're forced to eat the exact same bland survival rations day after day. Finally, Section 5, Historical Survival Lifesavers. Crops that pulled humanity back from the brink. So the crucial point here is that this isn't just neat botanical trivia. We are talking about real, massive human stakes. These are the specific crops that have actively saved whole civilizations when everything else failed. 30,000 years. That's how far back archaeological sites in Egypt show early humans relying on the tiger nut. Now, it's not even a true root, it's a sedge, but its survival power is virtually unmatched in the natural world. It can sit in the soil totally dormant for years. Through intense, devastating, multi-year droughts, the tiger nut just goes into this state of absolute suspended animation. It simply waits, sometimes for years on end, until the rain finally comes back, and only then does it sprout. That kind of unyielding resilience, that is exactly what fueled early human evolution. Alongside the tiger nut, history gives us these totally low-effort, indestructible perennials like skirret and Chinese artichokes. Skirret was an absolutely massive staple in medieval Europe before the modern potato came along and entirely replaced it. It's a cold, hardy plant that just happily cranks out sweet parsnip-like roots year after year without any fuss. And Chinese artichokes, they are fascinating. They're these frost-hardy little spirals that look almost like miniature crunchy accordions. You don't even have to peel them or replant the patch. They just keep spreading and feeding families with maximum efficiency and literally minimal preparation. If you're someone who absolutely hates weeding and replanting your garden every single spring, the Chinese artichoke is your dream come true. Now this next number is truly astonishing. 17 to 20%. That is the protein content by dry weight of the American groundnut. Just compare that directly to your standard everyday potato, which sits at a measly 2%. This isn't just a basic carbohydrate, it is a vital underground protein powerhouse. And history proved its immense worth. When the Pilgrims arrived in North America in the 1620s, those brutal early winters nearly wiped them right off the map. They were freezing, starving, totally unprepared. It was the generous Native American knowledge of this specific high-protein tuber, showing the Pilgrims exactly where to dig when everything above ground was dead and frozen, that literally kept their fragile settlement alive. Another incredible native lifesaver is the common camas. Its bulb sits deep underground, safe from the intense, controlled landscape burns that indigenous land managers masterfully use to enrich the topsoil. When you slow cook it in an earth oven, it transforms into this sweet molasses-like calorie bomb. But listen up, because there is an absolutely critical foraging rule here. Notice the difference in the flowers. The common camas shares its meadows with a nearly identical plant called the death camas. You have to identify them while they are flowering in the spring, way before you harvest the bulbs in the fall. Blue or purple flowers, that means it is safe, sweet, and nutritious. White or cream flowers, that means it is highly toxic and dangerous. You absolutely must learn the difference before you ever attempt to forage this one. And this brilliantly illustrates our final, ultimate, climax crop, the rutabaga. It goes by a bunch of names: swede, neep, yellow turnip, but historically it carried a much heavier title: the poor man's gold. This is the absolute king of survival foods, and trust me, it's not because it's fancy. You see, the rutabaga completely lacks the exotic chemistry of those Andean tubers we talked about, but its sheer reliability is the stuff of legend. During the Great Depression in the 1930s, when markets collapsed, jobs just vanished overnight, and millions suddenly couldn't afford to buy groceries, this humble little root kept entire families alive. Try to paint that picture in your head for a second, having a cellar full of rutabagas when there was absolutely zero money coming in. It thrives in the most marginal, rocky, clay-heavy, completely nutrient-depleted dirt where absolutely nothing else will even sprout. It is packed with enough vitamin C to single-handedly fend off winter scurvy. It uses that same brilliant winter antifreeze trick we talked about earlier, converting starch to sugar so it becomes incredibly calorie-dense. And best of all, it stores flawlessly in simple, unpowered root cellars for months on end. When things got historically tough, people weren't relying on exotic, finicky tropical plants. They survived day in and day out on the accessible, completely indestructible rutabaga. Which brings us to the end of our explainer today, and it leaves us with one incredibly important question to ponder. We've built this modern world that is so heavily dependent on fragile, energy-hungry supply chains. But the forgotten skills of our ancestors and the incredible self-storing superpowers of these 17 plants, they're all still out there, just waiting patiently in the soil. So I'll leave you with this. If the grocery store is empty tomorrow, what is actually growing under your feet? Thanks for joining me, and keep learning.